All right, outstanding. So I'll call to order the work session for the Milwaukee City Council for June 1st. And our first item is the Downtown and Milwaukee Business Association update with Allison Wicks and Rory.
Great, thank you. Hi everyone, Allison Wicks. I'm the Development Project Manager for the City of Milwaukee. And this is our quarterly DMBA update. So we invite Rory here quarterly. Recent kind of work with the DMBA and downtown businesses include, we just did a quick round of small grants to downtown business, or not to businesses all over Milwaukee to support outdoor seating. So we should have about 12 outdoor seating areas kind of being improved or popping up around the city. So that's exciting for the summer season, kind of a mix of sidewalk seating and parking space seatings, improving existing patios. And then I've also had a couple, so I'm also the liaison to the DMBA. And we've had a couple meetings recently really focusing on events and what looks like will be both allowed and feasible for this year. So with that, I'll pass it over to Rory for the majority of the update.
All right, thanks, Allison.
Yep.
And great to see everyone. Happy, I guess, summer with the weather out there today. Yeah, so we, the DMBA, have been working to be as proactive as possible given the circumstances. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the idea of, First Friday coming back. Everything I'm, want to share with you comes with the stipulation, of course, that it's safe to do so. Planning, as you all know, takes some time, and we're trying to plan, contingency A, B, and C, of course. A being that we could possibly pull this off before the end of the season in October. The idea is that the city businesses do really well with events. It brings business downtown. I think everyone probably can imagine that that's something that would really make a difference with the pedestrian traffic for the businesses that really rely on it. That's why the focus on events, as I've come before, is really important. So, with that being said, we took the council's guidance, and we worked hard in the last 3 months to collaborate with many of our local organizations. We've been teaming up with the Neighborhood Association, also with Celebrate Milwaukee, and as well with the arts committee too. So we are starting to put our heads together and think about how we can help one another with these events. So that's been a good start to that relationship. I think some good conversations have come out of it. The idea would be to start off with something known, right? If we're going to have events, let's do something we know how to do, and that's why First Friday becomes such a easy, common ground to kind of gather around. So our thoughts initially are to have an event in perhaps September and October. Obviously, that is safety first. And then, we also got to look at, what can we afford to do? So my first question is really about, I'm going to share with you a few details, is about how to get a formal proposal if we did need some funding, and we probably will need a little bit of funding, although we do have now about $4,200 we collected so far, which is great. If we did need to put together some funding and something we wanted to bring to council, I guess one of my questions is, what is the process for doing so? And how could we maybe expedite it, I guess, given that we have a short time frame? I don't know if anyone wants to tackle that question first, or we can come back to the questions at the end. I'm open to either.
Let's do the questions at the end.
Great. Okay, no problem. Okay, so that's the first part. I just want to find that process out. The idea, if we did do the event, and there's a couple ways that perhaps the council and the city could help us. One, of course, obviously, is financially. Ideally, and I'm not sure about the budget, that's something that I'm going to put together a formal proposal this week, and I would happily submit that as part of the application for this process. But ideally, I think would need about $10,000 if we did 2 events. And I told you I had $4,200. already secured, which is a great start. And I could probably secure some more from businesses around the area. So let's call my ask $5,000. And that's, again, if I did 2 events. I'm open to doing just one if that's what would happen to, and that's all my funding would allow. Essentially, with the safety, I really would think about having to close down the streets. Maybe not in the east-west fashion for TriMet, but in the north-south, the blocks, the plaza, the block between Washington and Jefferson, Monroe, and, what's the street there by City Hall? I'd leave the one street open for parking so we could park in front of the area there and utilize that. But then, Harrison to the street that's past the beer store might be closed too. And I think that closing the streets could give more space. That's why I think it's an important aspect of this. But I also know having the police involved is an important aspect too of having to make that request. And so I only bring that up as part of my proposal to give you some ideas about where I might need help. I'm not asking for an answer quite yet, but those are some things that we think if we did do the event that we think would be necessary to help with spacing. We would plan accordingly based upon those kind of ideas. If we had to do just an October event, we have already been teaming up with the high school. We would love to do a reunion and celebrate the opening of the new school. It's all part of one big homecoming weekend. So we're linking up with the other parts of the city that might benefit from something like this too. And so, those are some things that came out of our collaboration idea too. So just kind of wanted to share some of the thinking going on. I was on the edge of whether or not we should do it or not. And then I put to task the downtown business community to say that, are you willing to participate? And I had great feedback. Lots of people are really excited about the idea, which brought me a lot of hope. So I share that with you as well as, if it was just Kelly and I coming to you with a request to try to put this event on, I probably wouldn't be having this conversation with you because we do need everybody's participation and help. And I think Allison actually had forwarded me some information. There's many small, vendors and things of that nature that, would probably gladly fill the streets in hopes that they could vend some of their hardworking arts and crafts that they've, been not able to sell for the last year and a half. So that's kind of the idea and where the community of the downtown business owners stands. And, I guess I'll kind of pause at this moment and kind of hear your feedback, thoughts, concerns, and questions.
Well, I, for one, am happy to hear that you're planning and that you've gotten a good response. I don't know what the answer is about city funding, and I'll defer to staff to talk about that. I don't think the city is traditionally funded, First Friday, but it is an extraordinary time, and so maybe there's some flexibility there. I'm really glad to hear that you guys that there's some energy behind doing this.
So we checked to see if the COVID dollars that were coming from the federal pot would qualify. They do not, unless we were reimbursing ourselves because money we had already set aside was spent elsewhere. So there is not funding available. Council would need to take funding from somewhere, especially since we're at a midpoint in a budget cycle, in order to move the funds to a different event.
Okay, thanks for that.
I'm super excited to hear that you've got engagement from other downtown businesses. I think that's a great step in the right direction. And I know that's sometimes hard, especially during COVID times when all of our small businesses are really fighting to just figure out how to put one foot in front of each other. As Anne said, we would have to figure out where to get money from. I would be excited to be able to support this. So I hope we can have a discussion and try and figure something out. But that's just me, and it's not a conversation we've had yet. And it's really a bummer that the ARPA dollars are not available, because that would have been a super easy match. And I know that this is not the only city or the only organization that's sort of struggling with this. We need to get people back out on the streets and in businesses, but finding the dollars to make that work is really a hardship. So I hear you, and I'm interested in figuring out ways that we can support you in making that happen.
Thank you. Mayor Gamber, you might have been muted, and I think you had a comment. I didn't hear you. If you could repeat. No?
No.
No, okay, no problem. I thought I missed something, that's all. One of the ways that could possibly be helpful is I know that the police budget doesn't normally contain after hours work for festivals or for events, right? And we would need some sort of, police to help us block the street. At least that's what I've heard. And so I don't have a good understanding of the process. And so that's, one of the ways that I bring it up. And I don't know if that's something that could be an area you could help us in. Certainly, I know that not blocking the TriMet paths through the city is an important facet of this, and something I'll certainly do the legwork to make sure that doesn't get affected with a proposal plan, right? I think that's probably a hardship to get TriMet involved to redirect people for this event, and so I would try to avoid that at all costs. I'm certainly flexible with the plan. Like we just made it up with what we think the best way to put the event on with. Our hope is to, utilize the plaza for entertainment. We want to be one of the first people to do just that and leverage that space. I think that's an exciting aspect of this plan. If that's the only space we could, block off for the event, then so be it. Right. I mean, I know it's a lot easier to block the plaza given how it's been built. So, I'm really flexible with the plan. If no's the answer, no's the answer. If you could support us in any way, that'd be great. We'll write a proposal with or without what we can get. If I only have $4,200 to run the whole event, we probably could figure it out. We have a lot of creative people in this town, and a lot of people will probably donate their time to do so. We just don't know what we don't know. And, we want to try to advertise the best we can to draw from both inside and outside of the city for the event, of course. And so that's where I guess the budgetary items kind of come into play and what's behind the idea. So.
I do believe that the city uses its cadets often for traffic control. So I'm happy to have that discussion. I don't believe that there is a cost for that. So I will talk with the chief and see if there's an opportunity for us to support it in that way.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
We could, couldn't we also look at, when you do a block party in any of the other residential neighborhoods, you apply for, and then you have to create a traffic control plan. It doesn't involve any dedication of staff time or resources other than reviewing the plan to make sure that it can be done so it's not affecting, any TriMet traffic. I would think that you could come up with just apply for the same permit, the same block party permit within downtown that doesn't obstruct that kind of traffic.
Okay.
And doesn't need police protection.
Okay. Yeah. That's great feedback.
I just don't know. I think I agree with you, Counselor. I think that there isn't a fee. And I do believe that our staff dedicates their time to it already to do it. The TriMet buses are the one piece I can't answer. So I just don't know what that process looks like. But Brenna can walk us through that tomorrow. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know what I don't know. When I've broached it with other members of my community, this is the feedback I've gotten. And I think that, maybe there's some folks that just don't know the answers either. We've just made some guesses over time. So helping to have some clarity, that makes a big difference. I mean, let's hope it's a lot simpler than I, even thought it was, which would be even better. So obviously the good weather has brought, people down to the streets, which has been great. I mean, obviously the food cart pod has expanded. Thank you for including it in this month's pilot. I thought that was a great addition. Any businesses that we can add and continue to promote through there is very helpful. So that really completes what I have today. Oh, just City Manager Over, would you tell me what the process is for submitting what I need to submit? I know the normal events plan. Should I just submit through the normal event structure and we can proceed through there, or is there something else I need to do?
That sounds great. But if you want to just send me a quick email or send one to Brenna and CC me, we'll get back to you tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah, I probably wouldn't get it to you till tomorrow, but that would be a good start. Okay.
Kelly Brooks actually knows the answer to this far better than I do.
Oh, she does.
I do, yeah. So there's an event permit and we can send you the link and you start filling that out, and that would have all the details of your event, and then we can process that and review that at the city. And then we do actually have kind of a separate, you would probably get to beta test it for us for the plaza closure. So we have already developed template closure protocols for that space that would just come, that would already be set. So I think we would go through both those things with you, and then
no need to send me the link. I have the link. I just didn't know if, given there was additional funding, perhaps that there was a different way to fill out an application for those kind of things. But I'll just submit it as normal, or as normally would, with the addition to those plaza elements, and then we can proceed. Okay.
Yeah, and let us do some looking and some thinking about how else we can support you.
Well, thank you for that. Great. Appreciate your all's help. Have a great week.
Yeah, you too. All right. Our next item is the Neighborhood District Association NDA Grant Program, a discussion which will be led by Jason Walks.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Kelly, for answering the event questions there. I haven't done an event for so long, I kind of forgot how to do them. So wasn't sure if I could answer that question. So yeah, I'm here tonight. I have a little PowerPoint we can go through, but really I just wanted to kind of have a discussion, and I just wanted to let you know also that, as you know, I believe there's going to be some folks from the Arts Committee after I speak who wanted to speak as well, kind of in relation to what I'm going to talk about. So just wanted to bring that up and make sure that you're aware that that's happening after I talk. So let me let's see. I'm going to share my screen if I can here. Why does it do that? I'm having trouble sharing my screen. I apologize. It just keeps asking me who can share. And I'm telling all panelists, but it's not doing anything. Yikes. Scott, you wouldn't happen to have that PowerPoint, would you?
I do. I did make you a co-host, but give me a second. I'll go ahead and share it here in a second, Jason.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I think sometimes since I'm an account manager on the account, it thinks I'm a different person. All right. Thank you, Scott. All right, so thanks, Scott. So the topics I wanted to talk to you about tonight around the NDA grant program really resulted from March. In March, there was some public testimony that was given about the program and some experiences that someone had. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then in relation to that, the origin of the program, I think, is important to talk about when we're talking about the grant program, because it has changed over time. I'm going to talk a little bit about requirements of the NDA grant report, which basically we ask all the NDAs to complete each year to get their next allocation of funding. And then the one thing that I wanted to talk about that was in the staff report, it was the idea of a code of conduct for the NDA members, which you currently don't have, that's similar to the boards and committees. And any other issues or concerns that you'd like to talk about today. So I just wanted to kind of leave it open, but I wanted to go through some of the details and highlights for our discussion. So if you can go forward, Scott. So yeah, as I mentioned, on March 2nd, there was some public testimony given by an Arts Committee member who had been going around to the NDAs and basically asking for funding for an event. And in that process, they identified one particular meeting in which they felt that they weren't treated very well when they were given the testimony or presentation about the event and how the money would be spent and that sort of thing. And so some things, the three areas really sort of rose up to the top in terms of what we should talk about in relation to that. And that includes the current guidelines and policies we have in place for the grant program, the approval process for grant applications from community partners like the Arts Committee when they go to the NDAs for funding. And then, as I mentioned earlier, whether or not we ask our NDA officers to sign a code of conduct and sort of what helps, I guess, with the conduct of NDA members. You know, what languages do we have in relation to that? You can go forward, Scott. So I'm going to go back in time a little bit, walk down memory lane. So the program was started in 1998 by resolution. And at that time, it went for about 12 years in this manner. So in that resolution, there were four categories that projects could be, that the grant program could fund. Neighborhood organizing and organizational development, neighborhood physical improvements, preservation, and then cultural, social, or recreational initiatives. And all of those have remained. Those are, you know, even today, those are the four categories that are eligible for the funding. And, you know, in the resolution, there's a lot more detail in relation to each one of these. At that time, this was a matching grant program, and it was called that. It was called the Neighborhood Matching Grant Program. And we also asked members of the NDAs to come up when they proposed projects to the city. They had to come up with some matching contribution of equal or greater value. And these are the three categories that they could use to propose that match. As you can see, 25% had to come from volunteer labor. And really, in the end, a lot of the match came from volunteer labor because the NDAs didn't have a lot of funding, so they could use that volunteer labor as leverage, basically, to match the projects. Go ahead, Scott. Yeah.
Oh, you've got another slide on this. Okay.
Yeah, one more slide. And so in addition to that, at the conclusion of each project, NDAs were required to provide a report that accounted for their expenses and matching contributions. And we'd make this big report at the end of the year. And we'd really use this program as a way to entice people to get involved in their NDA. You know, basically saying we have funding that can get a lot of things done, you know, come to your NDA, propose projects. A few key points about this time period, about 12 years, was applications were all reviewed and approved at first by a citizen committee that was put together, but it only lasted a few years in that regard. The majority of that 12 years, staff basically reviewed the proposals. All the funding was kept by the city, and we only distributed it once a project was approved. And then only NDAs could apply for funding, but they were encouraged to partner with groups like the Arts Committee or other community organizations. Go ahead, Scott. Yes.
My experience is a little different than what you're saying here and what you said in your staff report as to that next to last bullet. By 2003, when I became a neighborhood chair, the money was being transferred over to the NDA. The $4,000, or I think it was still maybe $3,000 at that point, was being transferred over to NDAs, but any expenditure of it did have to go through an approval process and a match. And I think if a check was cut on the account, the city staffer or somebody had to co-sign. I was never the treasurer, so I'm not exactly sure how that piece of it worked, but I do know that NDAs were getting the money and watching a bank account build, at least as of 2003.
Yeah, they would get the money, but after the project was approved. So then they get the cash to do the project, and then they'd have to report back on that.
No.
Okay.
They would get a lump sum, and it would be our bank account. It would be like we got a lump sum, but we couldn't spend it unless we got a project approved and showed that we did the match. And like in Island Station, a lot of it was Spring Park, and it was easy to get a match because we had lots of volunteer labor or whatever. Okay. But I'm pretty sure the money was being transferred. I think if you went back and looked at the city, budget from that time, by that point, maybe it started differently in 1998, but by 2003, 2004, I'm pretty sure the money was being transferred.
Well, I worked for the city from 2001 to 2005, and up until I left, it was working the way I recall it in my staff report. I wasn't here from late 2004 to 2016. Yeah. At 12 years, I was not working for the city, And during that time is when it made the switch. So I honestly do not recall what happened after 2004 because I wasn't here, but this was what, in terms of everything that I've been able to find, how it was managed at that point up until 2010.
Well, I'll just say that I guess whether the money switched, switched hands or just accrued in an account and carried over,
Yeah,
isn't so important. But the perception of the NDAs was that they had, this money, and some NDAs chose to spend on concerts and events every year and kind of depleted theirs, used theirs up every year. And some NDAs chose to bankroll it and use it for more infrastructure type projects, like either a park or like Linwood NDA spent more recently gave to Wichita Park, but even before that, they had a history of saving it and using it for a track at Linwood Elementary. So, different NDAs had different theories about how they wanted to spend their money.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I think the key point in terms of the conversation around how the Arts Committee, I think it's is really in the next version of the program in terms of how the NDAs now have the ability to basically create projects on their own. There's really no city oversight on whether there's a match or anything of that sort. So, Scott, if you want to go to the next slide, I can talk a little bit. So in terms of what we have now, we don't call it the matching grant program anymore. We just call it the NDA grant program. From what I understand, it was revised to save staff time to administer, because obviously receiving applications, reviewing them, all the work that goes beyond that is a little bit more staff time. And it also allows the NDAs to access the funding easier rather than having to apply for each project and come up with match. So currently, and we've had this for a while, we've been giving the NDAs $4,000 annually after they submit a grant report to us at the end of the year, which I'm currently collecting right now. And then in July is when they get their next $4,000. As I mentioned before, the categories haven't changed the same from the original resolution on what's eligible. We do have a grants policy that we update annually. Some questions have come up over the years, so we've added to that. The NDAs develop, approve, and use their own funding for their own projects. So they come up with ideas, they brainstorm, they come up and then implement projects. Important for this discussion, I just wanted to mention, as I said, community partners that can now apply directly to the NDAs, whereas for in the beginning of the program, you couldn't necessarily do that. And then the NDAs basically review and approve all of the applications according to if they feel as though that's something that's important to the neighborhood. And it's really who's at the meeting and who's there and who's leading the NDA is really what matters. Lastly, the funding is kept in individual NDA bank accounts, and the city doesn't have any access to those accounts. The NDA grant report at the end of the year basically is how we sort of keep track of what's going on. Next slide, Scott, please. All right, so I just wanted to bring up the grant report and in the staff report, I showed you kind of what we end up collecting. It's an overview of the expenditures and revenues, the most recent bank statement. We do ask that they sort of give us some general ideas of how they'd like to spend carryover grant funding. So anything above like $4,000, it is written in the policy that says, at least give us a general idea of how you would like to spend this funding kind of moving forward so that they start planning. Each signer on the account must sign an access contract that kind of just basically talks about how you can't spend the money and how you can. And then we ask for supplementary materials, and that's really used for this annual NDA grant program report that we've been doing for the past couple of years. And here's an example on this slide of Linwood from a couple of years ago. It basically shows kind of the groups they supported, some things they did, usually one photo of a fun thing that they helped support. Go ahead, Scott. And so that's kind of a background of where we were with the grant program. In terms of addressing the Arts Committee's experiences, and I've heard some other groups say that sometimes when they go to NDAs, maybe they're not treated as well as they'd like to be. But I would say that that's probably does not happen the majority of the times. And the majority of the times the NDAs are very gracious, have supported a ton of really good work, and do a really good work as well. So the programs really result in a lot of amazing things. But we had started talking about, actually prior to this, a code of conduct for the NDA officers that's similar to what we ask our board and committee members to already sign. I did want to mention that the NDA grant program policy currently talks about how, and there's language in there about what happens if an NDA expends grant funding in an improper manner, and how there is a potential of losing access to further funding, things like that. So that's in there. But there's really no place that we have anything about conduct. Even the NDA bylaws mostly talk about the roles and the duties, of the different leadership members. And so, today I am mentioning in the staff report in terms of recommending that we do have folks start to sign a code of conduct. And in that code of conduct, there is language related to how folks are treated when they're coming to the NDAs for grant support. Go ahead, Scott. The last thing I just wanted to mention before we talk a little bit more about and takes any questions you might have is I just wanted to talk about the enforcement of the code of conduct. We don't have a lot of teeth. Since the NDA officers, like board and commission members, are not appointed by city council, they appoint themselves. As I mentioned, the violation of the grants policy can result in losing access to grant funding, but there's really no way, the bylaws don't mention it. There's no mention of conduct. What could happen potentially is, obviously, when the next election comes, folks could lose their leadership positions if anybody was compelled to do so. But I just wanted to bring that up because, I think it'll still go a long way when people sign it and read such a document, but we don't necessarily have any sort of mechanism for enforcing it at the moment. So that's really all I had tonight, at least I believe, Scott. Is there another slide? Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any other questions or comments that you might have about the grant program in general.
I had a question for you, Jason, and thanks for the additional history of the grants program and all of the additional detail. I had the gist of it, but that was a nice overview, so I appreciate having that. I know that there's some, I did read the code of conduct and I appreciate a lot of the language in there. I was wondering if there's any clarity around what happens if you don't do the 4 things that you're required to do, like the signing the bank account agreement and all of that. I think it would be really helpful to clarify that those are required steps for NDA officers.
Okay. Yeah, I do want to mention that. So I do a spreadsheet of their report every year for each NDA, and until everything has been sort of checked off, they don't get the NDA doesn't get the next allocation of funding. So it's kind of a check and balance we've created to basically, have all this stuff in line and make sure we have it all in place. But that's a good thought.
So those 4 things are required. Okay, you're saying it's not. Sorry.
It is. Just the only repercussion is you don't get the next allocation of funding until all that stuff has been.
Okay. Yeah, if you could clarify that in there, I think that would be great. Thanks. Okay,
it's a good thought. Definitely. And I did want to mention what I didn't address in this, and I know it came up in the testimony from the Arts Committee was, how the boards and committees are funded. Now having, they go to the NDAs because the NDAs have grant money available. But I didn't address, that any further. So I mostly was talking about the conduct policy.
So your staff report does say that the policy was sent to them for input and you had some response. Were they notified of this discussion tonight?
Yes, I did put it in my Friday update on Friday to make sure folks saw it. Yeah.
Do we want to hear from, you said there were some members of the community who wanted to address this item from the Arts Committee specifically? I mean, I've got some other, kind of like little questions about some of the language that's in some of these things, the policy and also the code of conduct. But I don't know if we want to dig into that necessarily until after we hear from folks, if they're hoping to talk to us. I don't know, Mayor, does that sound good to you?
Yeah, that's fine. If we've got,
yeah.
if we're going to flip it to the folks, I see there's 4 members of the Arts Committee present. I'm going to start with Alicia, bring her in because she's the one who's emailing, and I'll promote others as there. So Alicia, you're allowed. You should be allowed to speak now. Can you hear us and talk?
Yes,
Alicia?
I can. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yep.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the opportunity to speak tonight. First of all, I just want to let you know how much we've appreciated the council and the city's support for the Arts Committee. And but speaking to Jason's presentation and the code that you guys are looking to address, I think that for several reasons. Well, I'm just grateful to know that you're addressing it because it's very difficult to try and go to these NDA meetings. There's 7 of them, so you're going to multiple places, and to receive anything other than a warm reception is difficult, to say the least. And when we're all here as volunteers trying to support our community and make our city a little more livable space, it's disappointing. I would also like to add that the process for asking for money, especially when I think about it specific to, I think of Porch Fest, where we were literally having to go to the NDAs multiple times because a lot of them need you to present twice, or they have to have 2 votes, 2 discussions, really prolongs the process for actually even acquiring the money once it is approved. So we actually didn't get money until the very last minute right before Porch Fest. So it doesn't allow a lot of room for any kind of last minute, and I wouldn't say that this was a last minute event by any means, but it just takes, it's such a long process that it doesn't allow us to be spontaneous if we have a good idea. And, so that's kind of where we're coming from. And I did submit a proposal earlier today that highlighted our ask for funds. And I don't know if that's something that you want to address right now, or if you want to deal with the code of conduct questions that you have, Councillor Appelner, or so I'll defer to you all as to how best to proceed.
You're on. We may as well do both. So
okay.
Start one.
Well, we just wanted to, really thank you, because thanks to the funds that the city provided to us over the past, we had our initial $10,000 that was funded for murals when we started the mural program, and then you graciously gave the city or the Arts Committee $20,000 for murals again. And we have successfully gone through all of that money. I know a big part of the Arts Committee's charge was to actually take the money and put up some murals in our city. And we successfully did that last year, really taking the diversity, equity, and inclusion lens, as well as, thinking about our local artist, Joe Rizzo. So we just want to thank you, for that support. And we are in the middle of trying to get another mural done at Chapel Theater. We have a lineup of mural artists ready to go once we have funding, as well as approval on business buildings, some of which we have already. So we're just looking to have some kind of stable funding that allows us to continue the momentum that we've had over the course of the past year during the pandemic. We want to continue to be able to put up murals, and we continuously will be seeking out grant funding, but as we all know, that is unreliable and something that we can't count on. We will continue to pursue them as we move forward, but we would love to see if we can get stable funding for murals, and then in addition, allow us a stable funding for some of our events that the city all enjoys. So, we've asked for $20,000 for events. We've asked for $25,000 for murals. The events number, we spent about $4,000 per Porch Fest event. We have a Bing cherry drop that we're looking to consider bringing into the city. We would love to be able to do that and have some funding for that. We would love to participate in the Winter Lights Festival from a more, visible and city focused way. And, it just allows us to continue to brainstorm new creative ideas to engage our community. So that's what we're presenting today. And I'm open to any questions.
Anybody have any questions? I just want to clarify, see, there was a written proposal. Did that go out an email today or something? Okay, I'm a little behind on my email, so I haven't seen it.
I think it came in, it was a busy afternoon for me too, but around 1, I think today, and I forwarded it out to you.
Okay, we'll take a look at that and then, you know, have future conversations both with the council and the budget committee, talking about budgets going forward.
Thank you, Mayor Gamba. And oh, go ahead, Lisa.
I would also just say, in addition to our budget, I mean, you did recently put in for a grant that I know you didn't get for a mural on the post office near the
Yes.
South Downtown Plaza. But I do think there may be some, I recently got a list of some upcoming grants that included, you know, what they call placemaking grants. And it seems to me there might be some potential for even combining, you know, the mural with what we need to do in Dogwood Park, with what we, with maybe creating some shade, getting some nice shade structures or something for the plaza to make it, you know, a better place for hot summer events.
Yes.
So I think there, you know, there's some, and there may be some potential partnership with the Parks Foundation. I can't, I'm on that board, but I can't speak for that board. We haven't had that discussion, but I do think there, you know, may be some potential for trying to go for some grants jointly and you know, some of that placemaking money that comes out from Metro and elsewhere.
That would be great. I did actually include that on my list as the community placemaking, Metro placemaking grant, as something that we would definitely be looking for that specific spot, because I do think that there is placemaking opportunities there. And I would love to discuss further partnerships with you all to make that happen.
Good. And did you want to touch on the God, my brain is mush, sorry. The agreement, the new agreement with the NDAs?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, I think it's, I appreciate the idea of how difficult it is to have the oversight, but I do think it's important that a code of conduct would be welcome. And, you know, not only from the Arts Committee perspective and the experiences that we've had going into the NDAs, which for the most part really have been wonderful and occasionally have not been, but also just from a Island Station Neighborhood Association member. And, you know, I just think that it's a place for dialogue and open conversation and respectful conversation, and anything that we can do to ensure that that is what is taking place in those meetings would be welcome. So I say that from a community member, from an Arts Committee member, and an Island Station resident, so.
And I just want to say thank you to, I see several Arts Committee members who are in the participant list on Zoom. And, you know, I know that a number of you have had unpleasant experiences at different NDA meetings. And I just want to personally say that I'm sorry that that has been your experience. And that is deeply disappointing to me. And I have been at some of those meetings where that has occurred. So I know whereof you speak. And you should never be treated that way, not for the amount of work and care that you put in. So I'm sorry that that has happened, and I hope we can do something to make it better.
Thank you.
Was there anybody else from the Art Committee that wanted to speak, or is there anybody that has a question or a comment to the Art Committee? Anybody?
Do they post in chat? How do you, how? What's the process?
They could raise their hand, they could post in chat.
Okay. The new Zoom world.
Yeah, hopefully this is coming to a screeching halt in a month, at least for Milwaukee. I don't see any hands raised. Okay,
Thank you again, everyone, for your time. I appreciate all that you do.
thank you, Alicia. All right, Jason, do you need conversation feedback? Do you have questions for us?
I guess my overall question is, I mean, if you have certain aspects of the code of conduct, it seems as though you're supportive of the code of conduct. But if you have questions or comments around any parts of it, or they could improve it, or, I'd be happy to take them.
It seems sad that we have to do such a thing. General standing rule of don't be a jerk. But apparently that's not a standing rule anymore. But I didn't see anything in there that I would want to change necessarily. I think it's it's a good shot, right? We try that and see if that makes a difference, and maybe we need more kind of trainings or direct conversations with NDA leadership to talk about. I mean, when I got on council, I can remember there was a nonprofit that came directly to me to say, hey, we're looking for grants from cities for, I don't even remember what it was because it was 100 years ago. But I was told by city manager at the time, well, we don't do that anymore. We used to do that, but we don't do it anymore. All that money goes to the NDAs, and then the NDAs are meant to dole that out. And so I passed that along, and it's a pain because instead of coming to one city council meeting and asking for $10,000, you got to go to 7 NDA meetings and ask for $1,500 or whatever. But that's the system we currently have. And if they're treating people who are doing that poorly, they don't understand the program. And, it would be good to have a sense of how common this is, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, it's not, I wouldn't call it common. I mean, it definitely happens. I would say the majority of comments I receive from organizations that are going to the NDAs have good experiences. But yeah, I mean, I think we just got to the point where something like this can help. And it helps us align all of our volunteers with our boards and committees in a way. I mean, some of the folks on the NDAs have already signed that code of conduct. So, why not have all of our volunteers, kind of go through that same process?
Sure.
I remember when we rolled this out to the boards and committees 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago. It didn't meet with 100%. We love it. It was like 99.9%. We love it. This is great. I'll sign it. Here you go. We did receive one person who didn't want to sign it, and they actually didn't end up being on that committee for very long. Generally, it's been very helpful, not only in saying, hey, just be nice to each other, but it's been an opportunity for us to also send them our public meetings and records brochure. And I think it's helped as a welcoming orientation of sorts. And I totally agree with you, Mr. Mayor. We need to beef up our training schedule, and that's something that Jason and I have a role in working on in the future. So totally agree with you. And I think a code of conduct is a minimal first step in getting us down where we want to be.
Well, and I'll also point out that we all sign a code of conduct as council, and I appreciate and I'm glad that we do that every year, because I always think it's good to keep it in front of your face that this is the way I'm expected to behave in public, this is the way I'm expected to interact with you all. So I think the reminders are necessary in our, kind of slapdash cruel world, even for those of us who sit on the dais up here. So I think that a code of conduct is a good practice, and I would hope that it is taken as an encouragement, not an admonishment by the NDAs and by the boards and commissions, that it's really a, hey, we're all in this together. Just don't lose sight of that. People get heated, especially when you're talking about money. And just to really keep that in front and center.
A couple things on that. I think that it should be presented as sort of, this is a reflection of what we see you all doing really well most of the time. And if it's, if it's sort of framed that way, as opposed to, like you said, like it's not an admonishment, it's like, this is how we have conducted business, and this is how we expect, this is how we would like to continue. I also think that it's, like you said, every year, we look at it and we reflect on the language. And I think that there are some tweaks, and that's where my kind of notes are, is with a few thoughts that I have about some of the language that I know we have already been using, but I think going forward, we might, we just should probably engage with this document, periodically, so that we make sure that, the original intent of what we wrote, sort of sustains itself and is reflective of, what we actually intend for this thing to do. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't think I could send notes in an email if that's more helpful. I mean, it's not like this is something that we're not voting on this or anything tonight during a work session. So maybe that's the more appropriate place for me to detail those comments that I have.
Yeah, I think that's okay. Yeah, for sure. Definitely send them. And then, we can always look at the board and commission one and also the NDA one and make sure that they're kind of aligned to it at times.
Well, and I mean, we revisit ours in January, but it probably makes sense for the NDAs to do it after their elections, which just happened, I guess. So it's a good time with new officers in some NDAs to, be having that conversation with them.
And to the point about training, I just want to encourage Jason and Scott to touch base with John. I know that he's crazy busy, and I don't want to sound like I'm putting yet another thing on his plate, but if and when you do talk about additional training for NDA folks and boards and commissions, we should consult with the equity manager, and you've probably already thought about that, but I feel better for having said the obvious thing.
Definitely. I'm looking forward to be back in person too, to do trainings in person again, because yeah, that's been hard. I think that's all I have. Is the mayor talking?
Nope. I was beginning to move us on if nobody else had anything else on this one.
I was just going to say I'm all for code of conduct, as you can see over my shoulder. These are classroom agreements, and we do it in our classrooms. And, we teach our kids this in 3rd and 4th and 5th grade. It's just common human decency.
Yep. Thank you for doing that.
Maybe I have a really quick question that maybe, I don't know if it's going to take us way off track, and it's not about specifically code of conduct, but this has sort of been bothering me a little bit. Like, okay, so we have a map that shows that lace or Swiss cheese or however you want to refer to it, our eastern boundary. And as those properties annex into the city, I think, we basically just assume them, they just get assumed into the neighborhood that is adjacent. But I guess I just want to point out that, longer term, we really should probably have a conversation about whether that's appropriate, and there should be a community engagement process around that, because those are actually existing community, like planning organizations. Like they have actual structure, and there are neighborhoods that we just assume are now becoming part of Llewellyn or part of Linwood, or and I don't know that that's the way it should be done going forward. I mean, right now we're talking sort of like it's pretty spotty. It's 1 or 2 properties every once in a while, but I guess I just sort of wanted to plant the seed because I keep seeing that map and thinking, you know, there's already a neighborhood, there's community organizations that exist, and some of them aren't very active necessarily, but some of them are. So
Yeah, that's a good thought.
I'm sure there are other organizations, you know, for that area. I know there was sort of a citizens, you know, I can't even remember what the name of it is, but there was a citizens group there. The formal county CPO, Community Planning Organization, is, I believe, has been defunct for quite a while because that came up in the discussions of the districts for the NCPRD District Advisory Committee. But I'm sure there are other, you know, more homegrown community organizations there, neighborhood groups of sorts, but.
yeah, and even just how they're named on the map. I mean, if you actually sort of like just look at the Google map, you know, it calls a certain area Harmony or Harmony Heights, or, you know, I mean, so I just think that, you know, we need to sort of recognize that there are distinct neighborhoods that already exist. And even if they are or aren't formally organized through the, you know, through the county's planning process or whatever, I just think that that's worthy of a conversation with the folks who actually currently live there. You know, that there might be some loose affiliations that we just don't even know about, and I think we should be respectful of that.
All right.
Well, thank you, everybody.
So the last item on the work session tonight is the board and committee bylaw template review, and this will be led by City Recorder Scott Stauffer.
Truly the highlight of the evening. I know. Thank you, everybody.
Waiting with bated breath.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just as recollection, it's on a similar theme to what we were just talking about. But before the pandemic in February of 2020, we had a study session where we had our board and commission leadership there. And one of the takeaway items to work on was standardizing our bylaws for our boards and committees. So as laid out in the staff report, a subcommittee of our staff liaisons group, we have all the board and committee staff liaisons meet periodically, and we had a subcommittee of that group. Myself and library director Katie Newell and associate planner Brett Kelver met, audited essentially where they stand. That's in the staff report in the packet. I'm prepared to present that and share that if you'd like to see that. It's sort of interesting, super nerdy, super wonky, but it's interesting to see what committees had what sections and what committees really had some sections and others don't even mention it. It's just a reflection of the fact that our boards and committees have been brought online at different times since 1921, which was a fun little tidbit to find out when our budget committee was established. And that they have bylaws that reflect the staff at the time and the needs of the committee and all that good stuff. And so we looked at that. We looked at some templates that had been put together in the last decade as we had attempted this before or had thought about it before, and kind of cobbled together the sections in an order that seemed to make sense. So that's what I'm presenting you tonight. I want to thank my colleagues, staff liaisons who helped shape this, and it's probably not the most interesting thing in the world, but as we were just talking about, it can have consequences for how certain situations are played out. So, and they're very helpful. They're the guiding documents beyond the authority given to them, the committees by council. It's the guiding documents for how they function. So I can share any of these, or we can talk about it, but really I'm looking for, we've audited it. We've seen what all the different committees have, cobbled together a template, trying to include as many of the pieces as possible. I'd like to know what council sees as missing or should be there, shouldn't be there. That doesn't make sense in that order, all those good things. And presuming that council is okay with the template, the next step for staff would be to present this, have the staff liaisons take it to the committees and basically update, streamline their current bylaws to meet the new template. So that was my report. I was hoping to keep it short and sweet. I can bring up parts of the packet if you wanted to look at that, or the Word document if you wanted to do any wordsmithing in the actual template itself. But that's where we are with this project.
Anybody have any? The only thing that occurred to me, and I may be misremembering this, but standardizing the election times for chairs is going to mean that somebody either loses part of their term or gets an extra long term. First time around.
People, you mean that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know,
Yeah.
Is there any advantage to the city in having all those elections occur at the same time?
Well, certainly for if nothing else, for just tracking who's on first and what's on second, right? Knowing who the chair is. Part of that is kind of related to the discussion we're having, and I can happily report on a different matter that's related. We received council direction to move to a semi-annual board and committee interviewing process, and we've got a template that we're gearing up to report to you on later this year, and then to begin implementing in 2022. But so when people are on board, it's kind of related to when terms end and start. And for most of our committees, that's April 1. And then for 2 of our committees, that's June 1. So then, or July 1. And so elections of officers, getting back to bylaws in this, then occur, for these committees, April and July. So I think I didn't survey that specifically in this process, but certainly that's something that will come to light as each committee puts their bylaws together. But I believe most of our committees hold their elections for officers after the terms begin. So we're already pretty standardized, I think, in April and July in terms of new term starting. And I know there's part of the discussion we've had with the semi-annual interviews is, can we push them all into the same time of year? And I think that's something that the city has talked about. We talked about that 5 years ago when a lot of them moved to April 1st start dates. There's 2 committees that I think are just Public Safety Advisory Committee is going to be what it is in summer because of when NDAs do their elections in May. And then the Budget Committee, it makes sense to have those terms end once a budget's been adopted in June. So those, you want new folks starting after the budget's been adopted, not mid-budget process. So that's sort of a brain dump, sorry about that. But standardizing elections and making sure chairs all start at the same time. It's a good point, Mr. Mayor.
Anybody else have any thoughts?
Thanks for keeping our ducks in a row.
Just to clarify, you said most of the boards and committees hold elections after the new appointments take? Okay, because our draft here says first meeting of the calendar year.
Okay, and that might be something, is that under the officers and elections of officers?
Yeah.
Yep, I see that. Okay. I am highlighting that now. I'll make that red to make me say April or July, depending on your committee term schedule. How about that?
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yep. And I'm just typing that. Oops. Where did you go? Zoom is fun. Yep, I noted that. We'll fix that to prompt them to either pick April or July, depending on their terms.
Anything else, anybody?
No, I really thought the chart was an eye-opener. Yeah.
It's interesting.
I mean, we knew they weren't alike. A lot of them weren't very much alike, but this really, puts that in stark terms. Yeah.
One committee was really concerned about email communication and had an entire section about that, which is just interesting. Well, if there are no other comments, like I mentioned, the next step is we'll have our staff liaisons run this out to the committees. As you're all familiar, our committees have a lot going on. So I suggested a year, give them a year to get these all worked in and it's kind of a thing that some folks can get a brain block about. But once you get into it, actually inserting what makes sense and having a discussion with the committees, I'm hopeful it'll be fairly painless for them. And eventually you will see all of them as the code calls for you to review updates to people's bylaws, board and committees bylaws annually anyway. It shouldn't be just, they'll be bringing you bigger packages of updating, and hopefully they just kind of fall in line with the standards that we got. And hopefully it's painless, but I do anticipate it taking 1 to 2 maybe years, given what everyone else has got going on. You're muted, Mr. Mayor.
So thanks, Scott. Good job.
I'm going to email everybody the PDF that I have that has my comments in the margins. I think that's maybe just the easiest way, because this relates kind of to the code of conduct language that I had questions about too. So since they're basically the same, I'll just email that to everybody right now.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Anybody else? If not, we are adjourned. I will see you all back here, different channel, 6 o'clock.
Thank you, Mayor.